left. All of them. The people who promised they'd be there when it mattered. The ones who said they believed in what you were building. The friends who claimed they had your back. They're gone now, and you're standing in the middle of your ambition with nothing but the echo of your own thoughts and a choice you didn't know you'd have to make. Do you quit because you're alone, or do you learn to win without them? Here's what nobody tells you about that moment. That moment when you realize you're genuinely on your own, when the support evaporates and the cheerleaders go silent and you're left holding your goals with nobody watching. That's not the tragedy. That's the filter. That's life separating people who need an audience from people who need results. And Machiavelli understood something about solitary strength that most people spend their entire lives running from. The capacity to win alone is the only capacity that actually matters. Because here's the reality. Everyone will abandon you at the exact moment it gets hard enough that staying becomes costly. Not out of malice, just out of self-interest. And the only question that determines your life trajectory is this. When they leave, can you keep moving? Not with motivational speeches about believing in yourself, with actual tactical weapons that turn isolation into advantage. I'm giving you 7 of those weapons today, and I'm starting with the most counterintuitive one right now in the next 60 seconds, because if you don't internalize this first principle, the other 6 won't save you. First weapon, and this rewrites everything you think about loneliness. Solitude is competitive advantage. Not because it's pleasant, not because it builds character, because every hour you spend alone working while others are socializing is an hour of compound advantage they can never recover. This isn't about being antisocial. This is about understanding that attention is finite, time is zero-sum, and every moment you give to maintaining relationships is a moment you're not giving to building capability. Listen to the math. If you work 10 hours a day in isolation while your competitor works 6 hours and spends 4 maintaining their network, you're gaining 4 hours of skill development daily. Over a year, that's 1,460 hours. That's 2 full months of 8-hour days. That's the equivalent of having 2 extra months per year while they're stuck in the same 12 months everyone else gets. You're not just working harder. You're literally operating in more time than people who need social connection to feel productive. Deploy this today. Take the time you'd normally spend on social maintenance, on being available, on keeping people updated on your progress, and redirect it entirely to capability building. Not as punishment, as investment. You're not sacrificing relationships. You're choosing between looking supported and being capable. And capability is the only thing that actually wins in the end. And here's what people don't understand about this weapon. They think isolation is the cost you pay for success. It's not. Isolation is the price of admission to a level of focus your socially dependent competitors can't access. They think you're lonely. You're not lonely. You're undistracted. There's a difference. Loneliness is wanting connection you don't have. Solitude is choosing focused work over diluted attention. One is suffering, one is strategy. But here's where it gets brutal, and this is what separates people who can actually use this weapon from people who just romanticize it. Solitude doesn't feel like competitive advantage. It feels like abandonment. Your brain is wired to interpret social isolation as danger. Every instinct you have will scream that you're doing something wrong, that you need to reconnect, that the isolation means you're failing. That's the cost. You have to override evolutionary programming that's trying to save you from a threat that doesn't exist anymore. Being alone won't kill you, but your brain will treat it like it will. Now, before I give you weapon 2, you need to understand what's actually happening when people abandon your mission. Because if you misdiagnose this, you'll waste years trying to fix something that isn't broken. When people leave, it's not because your mission isn't worthy. It's because supporting your mission stopped being convenient. They were there when it was easy, when it was exciting, when being associated with your ambition made them look good or feel important. But the moment the optics shifted, the moment it became costly to stay, the moment they had to actually sacrifice something to support you, the cost-benefit flipped. And self-interested people, which is everyone, leave when the cost exceeds the benefit. This isn't betrayal, this is just math. People aren't moral actors making principled decisions about loyalty. They're calculating machines running cost-benefit analyses every single day on every relationship they maintain. And when your stock drops, when supporting you becomes expensive, when association with your struggle hurts more than it helps, they divest. Not consciously, not maliciously, just automatically. The way water flows downhill. So when they leave, you're not losing support. You're gaining information. You're learning who was there for your mission versus who was there for the optics of supporting something that looked like it might succeed. That information is valuable. Use it. Second weapon, strategic emotional detachment. This is not about becoming cold. This is about removing the emotional load from other people's opinions of your work. Right now, you're carrying two weights, the actual work and the emotional burden of how people perceive that work. The work is necessary. The perception burden is optional, and it's killing you. Here's how this weapon works. Every time you feel emotional about someone's reaction to your work, about someone leaving, about someone criticizing your direction, you stop and ask one question. Does this person's opinion change the objective truth about whether I'm moving toward my goal? Not whether it feels bad, not whether it's fair. Does their opinion alter the actual reality of your progress? 99% of the time, the answer is no. Their departure doesn't change whether your business model works. Their criticism doesn't change whether your skill is developing. Their abandonment doesn't change whether you're closer to your goal today than yesterday. Their opinion is emotionally loud, but strategically irrelevant. Use this tomorrow. Someone criticizes your approach. Before you react, before you defend, before you adjust, ask the question, does this criticism change the objective truth about my progress? If no, acknowledge it and move on. No defense, no explanation, no emotional processing, just data collection and forward movement. You just saved hours of emotional energy for actual work. But here's the sophistication of this weapon. Strategic emotional detachment doesn't mean you ignore all feedback. It means you filter ruthlessly. Feedback from people who have accomplished what you're trying to accomplish gets processed. Feedback from people who haven't gets acknowledged and filed under irrelevant. The credential for having your opinion matter on my path is having walked a similar path successfully. Everyone else is just noise with feelings. Third weapon, weaponize their absence. The moment people leave, you gain something they took from you while they were present. Clarity about what you're actually building. When you have an audience, you perform, even unconsciously. You choose projects that look good. You make decisions that are defensible. You optimize for optics. But when the audience disappears, when nobody's watching, when nobody cares if you succeed or how you do it, you can optimize purely for effectiveness. This is the freedom nobody talks about, the freedom to be ugly in your methods, to take approaches that wouldn't photograph well, to make choices that you couldn't explain in a way that sounds impressive, to focus on what works instead of what looks like it should work. Their absence removes the performance pressure. Use that. Starting today, make one decision you've been avoiding because it wouldn't look good to explain. Not unethical, just inelegant. Just something that works but doesn't make a good story. That's the decision you make now that you couldn't make when people were watching. That's you weaponizing their absence. And here's what Machiavelli understood about this that most people miss. He wrote that it's better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But the deeper principle is this. It's better to be effective in private than impressive in public. Public impressiveness requires performance. Private effectiveness requires only results. When you're alone, you can finally stop performing and start producing. Stop. I need to be direct with you about something. If you're still watching this video, it means you're probably in that position right now, alone with your ambition. wondering if you're supposed to be able to do this without support. And I'm telling you, yes, you are. Not because it's fair, not because it's ideal, but because that's the actual requirement. The capacity to continue in isolation is the filter that separates people who succeed from people who had potential. So, here's what I'm asking. If these first 3 weapons showed you that being alone isn't the problem, it's the solution, subscribe right now. Because we're building something here. A community of people who understand that solitary strength isn't a character flaw. It's a competitive advantage. That the ability to win without an audience is more valuable than the ability to look good with one. Subscribe, and let's see how far you can go when you stop waiting for support that isn't coming. 4th weapon, self-contained validation loops. Right now, you need external confirmation that you're on the right path. You check metrics. You ask for feedback. You measure your progress against other people's reactions to your progress. This makes you controllable, because anyone who controls the validation you need controls your direction. Here's the tactical shift. Build internal metrics that measure progress independent of external validation, not how many people liked your work. How many iterations did you complete? Not how many people showed up to support you. How many hours did you invest in skill development? Not whether people think you're succeeding, whether you're closer to the capability threshold you need. Create a document today. List 5 internal metrics that measure your actual progress toward your goal. Metrics that don't require anyone else's input. Daily work hours. Skill competencies acquired. Project iterations completed. Whatever measures movement that you can track alone. Then check those metrics daily. Let those numbers validate your progress. Everyone else's opinion becomes background noise. And here's why this weapon is devastating when you actually deploy it. When you stop needing external validation, you become impossible to discourage. Because the only opinion that can stop you is yours. And you control that opinion through the internal metrics you're hitting. They can all leave, they can all doubt, they can all criticize, and you're still validated by the numbers you're generating alone. That's psychological independence. That's what wins alone actually means. 5th weapon, strategic opacity about your struggles. When you're winning alone, you will struggle. Massively. The temptation will be to share those struggles, to let people know how hard it is, to seek sympathy or support or acknowledgement of the difficulty. Resist that temptation like your life depends on it. Because it does. Here's why. The moment you publicize your struggles, you invite 2 things. Unwanted advice from people who've never done what you're attempting, and subconscious permission to quit because you've made the struggle the story, instead of making the outcome the story. Keep your struggles private. Make your results public. Starting tomorrow, when someone asks how it's going, your answer is either making progress or on track. Not the details of the difficulties. Not the obstacles you're navigating. Not the lonely moments or the doubt or the setbacks. Just progress or on track. You're not lying. You're just not giving them access to information they can't use to help you and will definitely use to doubt you. And here's the Machiavellian principle underneath this. He wrote that men judge by appearances and outcomes, not by the process. They don't actually care about your struggle. They care about whether you win. So give them nothing to judge except the win or the loss. Everything between is your private battle. Keep it that way. 6th weapon. Convert isolation into skill advantage. Every hour you're alone is an hour your socially dependent competitors are maintaining relationships instead of building capability. This isn't automatic. You have to actively convert that time into skill. And most people don't. They just sit in isolation, feeling sorry for themselves instead of using it as the training ground it actually is. Here's the protocol. Every hour you'd normally spend on social maintenance, relationship upkeep, emotional support exchange, you redirect to deliberate skill practice. not consuming content about the skill. Practicing it, failing at it, iterating on it. You're not trying to feel better about being alone. You're trying to become so capable that when you emerge from isolation, you're operating at a level they can't compete with. Deploy this today. Identify the 3 skills that would make you irreplaceable in your domain. Then allocate your isolation time to practicing those skills with the intensity of someone who knows this is their only advantage. You're not waiting for support. You're building capability they'll never catch up to. And here's why this weapon compounds. Skills build on skills. Every hour you invest while they're socializing doesn't just make you 1 hour better. It makes you 1 hour better at the foundation that makes the next hour of learning more effective. You're not just getting ahead. You're increasing your rate of getting ahead. That's compound isolation advantage. That's how you turn being alone into being unstoppable. 7th weapon. The long game mindset. This is the weapon that makes all the others sustainable. Because winning alone isn't a sprint. It's not a phase. It's potentially years of isolated work before the results justify themselves. And if you're optimizing for short-term validation, for quick wins that make people notice, you'll break before you succeed. Here's the mental shift. You're not trying to prove them wrong next week. You're building toward a position so dominant that their opinion becomes irrelevant in 3 years. Not because you convinced them, because you lapped them. This is Machiavellian time horizon thinking. Short-term optics don't matter. Long-term positioning is everything. Starting today, make one decision that only makes sense on a 3-year timeline. Something that costs you in the short term but positions you dominantly in the long term. That's you thinking like someone who wins alone. Because people who need constant validation optimize for quick wins that look good now. People who can tolerate isolation optimize for positions that are unassailable later. And here's what separates people who can actually sustain this. They don't view isolation as temporary suffering until people come back. They view it as permanent operating condition and build a life that works in that reality. They're not waiting for the loneliness to end. They're becoming the kind of person who wins whether anyone shows up or not. That's the difference. That's what this weapon gives you. Drop "I win alone" in the comments if you understand what we're actually building here. Now, let me show you how all 7 weapons integrate into one complete system. You embrace solitude as competitive advantage, gaining time your competitors sacrifice to social maintenance. You practice strategic emotional detachment, filtering all feedback through one question. Does this change objective truth about my progress? You weaponize their absence by making decisions that work but don't perform well. You build self-contained validation loops, measuring progress through internal metrics nobody else can see or influence. You maintain strategic opacity about struggles, publicizing only results. You convert every hour of isolation into deliberate skill practice, and you optimize every decision for 3-year positioning instead of next-week validation. You just created a system for winning alone, not because you want to be alone, but because you've accepted that serious ambition in the real world means extended periods of isolation, and you've built tactical weapons that turn that isolation from obstacle into advantage. Here's what Machiavelli actually understood about solitary strength. He wrote that the prince who relies entirely upon fortune is lost when it changes. What he means is this: if your capacity to succeed requires other people's support, you're not building strength. You're building dependency. And dependency always fails when conditions change. But the person who's built the capacity to win alone, who's developed weapons that work in isolation, that person isn't dependent on conditions. They are the condition. And here's what happens when you actually internalize these 7 weapons. You stop experiencing isolation as abandonment. You start experiencing it as clarity. You stop asking why they left. You start optimizing for what you can build while they're gone. You stop trying to prove them wrong. You start building positions they can't reach. You're not lonely. You're focused. You're not abandoned. You're filtered. You're not struggling alone. You're training without distraction. But I need to warn you about something that happens when you become this person. When you develop the capacity to win alone, when you build these weapons and actually deploy them, something shifts in how people perceive you. They'll call you distant, obsessed, unhealthily focused. What they mean is, you've stopped needing them and it makes them uncomfortable. Let them be uncomfortable. Their comfort is not your responsibility. Your results are. Some people watching this right now are thinking, but humans are social creatures. We need connection. You're right, but you're confusing need with preference. You prefer connection. You don't need it to produce results. And the moment you confuse preference with need, you give other people power over your capacity to execute. You can want connection. You can value it. You can build it when conditions allow. But you cannot need it, because the moment you need it, you're controllable. Tomorrow morning, everyone who left is still gone. Nothing changed except you now have 7 weapons. Solitude as advantage. Strategic detachment. Weaponized absence. Self-contained validation. Strategic opacity. Isolation to skill conversion. Long game optimization. You're not trying to bring them back. You're not waiting for new people to show up. You're becoming someone who wins regardless, and winning regardless is the only winning that lasts. The old you needed people present to feel capable of continuing. The new you has built systems that work in isolation. The old you measured progress by who showed up. The new you measures progress by internal metrics nobody else can influence. The old you optimized for looking supported. The new you optimizes for being capable. The old you could win with help. The new you can win alone, and the capacity to win alone is the only capacity that can't be taken from you. This is what winning alone actually means. Not that you're antisocial. Not that you don't value relationships. Not that you're better than people who need support. Just that you've built the tactical weapons to continue when support evaporates. Because support always evaporates at the exact moment you need it most. That's not pessimism. That's pattern recognition. And pattern recognition is what separates people who prepare from people who get surprised. If this video gave you 7 actual weapons for the isolation you're in right now, subscribe and turn on notifications. Every video on this channel gives you tactical psychology for the reality of serious ambition. Not the fantasy of endless support, the reality of extended isolation. Share this with someone who's alone with their goals right now. Drop "I win alone" in the comments if you're ready to stop waiting for support that isn't coming. Your transformation doesn't happen when they come back. It happens when you stop needing them to. Welcome to the other side.